So I was sent some interesting lenses. Sue actually sent me these lenses. And in this video, we're gonna talk about them. They actually wanted to send me two lenses, one of their new 35mm T29 1.6x squeeze anamorphic lens, and they wanted to send me a 135mm, which I just didn't think that made sense to compare and show off a 35mm and a 135mm. They're just in kind of different, they're the opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to focal length. So I then asked them if they could send me a 50mm instead of the 135, and they did. Now these aren't from the same line of anamorphics. You know, Sue has quite a few different lines of anamorphics. They have, you know, their older 1.33x, they've got these newer 1.6x, but then they have this newest one, this little baby, tiny little 35mm T29, which is kind of, I think, designed to go on like gimbals and stuff. It's much smaller, the front element is smaller. I think it's made out of carbon fiber. And then I got their Venus 50mm T29 1.6x anamorphic. This lens is much bigger, which I like. It feels more professional. It's like, it's a very hefty lens, something that feels really like your kind of traditional cinema lens. It has nice gearing on it, large front diameter, so you can, you know, use kind of standard diopters and stuff like that, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. And both of these lenses are full frame, but I didn't really want to use them on a full frame camera. I wanted to use them on my personal camera, my red Komodo. And that's not really a big deal. Yes, there's gonna be a little bit of a crop, obviously, when you're not using it on full frame, but either way, it's a 1.6x squeeze, so I'm still gonna get that anamorphic look. I'm just gonna kind of have to jam it down onto my little Komodo sensor. Basically, it's just like any other lens. It would be a little bit wider. You could get a little bit closer to your subjects with a full frame sensor versus doing it on a Super 35 sensor like this. But what's really cool about the Red Komodo is that there's anamorphic modes built into the camera, which a lot of cameras for some reason don't have that. I know Panasonic does that, which is great, but a lot of the Sonys don't do that. A lot of cameras just don't have these anamorphic modes built in, which is great because I still get 4K of resolution. I still get to shoot raw. I don't have to have a monitor that's going to de-squeeze it for me. It'll just do it right for me in camera. So 1.6x means it's, you know, it's squeezing it by 1.6 times. For the longest time, you know, with cinema lenses, we're using a 2x. It gives you the most squeeze factor. It kind of gives you the most distortion in the background. It gives you the most of that anamorphic look. When you're using like a 1.6 or like a 1.5 or 1.3, you're getting a little bit less of that kind of anamorphic vibe, but you're also able to have a little bit more pristine lenses. You're kind of splitting the difference between spherical and aspherical when you're doing it this way. And what's cool about anamorphics, you probably heard this before, is basically the width you get. So right now we are shooting on the 35mm at T29. So 35mm with a 1.6x squeeze. Basically you can take, you know, the 35mm is your focal length. It's how far you're zoomed in on the sensor, but your width is actually going to be the focal length divided by 1.6. So this is, let's see what that is. That's 35 divided by 1.6. That's about 22mm, 22.4mm. So it's like kind of like I'm shooting on a 22mm lens from a width perspective, but I'm getting the punch in of the 35, which is really cool about anamorphics. And that's honestly why anamorphics are so cool. And don't say it's because of the flares, because I hate flares. Honestly, I don't really love that many flares in general, but I really hate anamorphic flares. Why would I want a big streaking blue line across the screen to wreck everything in sight? Nope, that's not me. But that's just a personal thing. If you like flares, here's some footage of what the flares look like. Now I asked for the neutral, or I guess it's the kind of like amber flare for the 35mm because it comes in both options. And they were able to send that to me, but when they sent me the Venus 50mm, it actually has the blue flares, so you can sort of see what they both look like here. Obviously, if you're J.J. Abrams, you're shooting Star Trek, you want the blue flares. For me, for what I'm doing, I would always stick to a natural, like neutral flare or an amber flare or a silver flare, something that's not as distracting to the eye. Preferably when I see a flare on an anamorphic lens, I want it to kind of, you know, turn into a giant oval and kind of have that eyelash effect, which something like the Atlas Orions do. That I can get down with, but when it's just a big streaky line, that's just not my thing. So for me, when I'm shooting with these lenses, I'm just gonna kind of avoid those flares rather than leaning into them like a lot of people like to do. So as far as the body goes, they have a nice design. They've got decent gears on them. They feel good in the hand. They really do feel like proper cinema lenses. They're not gonna break on you very easily. They have nice markings on them. You can put screw-on filters on the front of them. So already for, the price, these are pretty decent cinema lenses. Now, because these are two different lines, I have a smaller one and a bigger one, they're not gonna take the same filter sizes. They're not gonna match when I'm putting on the follow focus, so that's something to consider when you're looking at the 35mm, but they do still make a full line of the Venus ones that you can, they mostly match. A lot easier to work with than what I'm doing here. Oh yeah, and speaking of the Atlas Orions, I actually shot a little test with these. I shot with the 40mm and the 65mm since I had them in from another shoot. And my thoughts were I was shooting on the 2x versus a 1.6x. So I thought that the squeeze would kind of help out, comparing a 35 to a 40 and a 50 to a 65. Not quite the case. At the end of the day, they are still 65mm focal lengths or 50mm focal lengths. So there was a little bit more of a punch on the 40 and 65. So you consider that when you're looking at this footage here. And obviously these look wildly different. The Atlases look really good. Not to say that the Surays don't look good, but you can really tell that the price difference here from the Atlas to the Suray, but you can't really complain about it because there is that huge price difference. Atlas cost way more than these Suray lenses. I have to say, the 2x squeeze still looks a little bit better than the 1.6. Maybe here soon, Suray will start releasing some 2x squeeze lenses, and you can get more of that anamorphic look. And the last thing I want to talk about, but not the least thing I want to talk about, is the close focus. Like many anamorphic lenses, these do not have great close focus. Generally speaking, even with really nice anamorphics, unless you get a specific macro one, like the Cooke 65mm macro anamorphic, you're going to need diopters. Now, diopters are basically like magnifying glasses that you put on the front of your lens so you can get closer to your subject. What this does though, is it removes your kind of far focus. You can basically not focus very far. Now, I didn't have a lot of proper diopters to test this out, but I did have these cheap little Vivitar diopters that I've used in the past that fit on the 35. They did not cover my 50mm because it's just too big of a front element. These are like $15. They're pretty crappy. I wouldn't recommend them, but if you're in a pinch and you need to get close focus, this is the way to do it. You can see in the test footage, there's this whole this clarity loss and this haze added to the background when putting it on the 35mm. Now, I have used these before on other spherical lenses and they didn't seem to look that bad, but for some reason right now they kind of look like crap, but it does help with that focus issue. Something to always consider when you're buying anamorphic, basically also add into the budget some sort of diopter system. Now you can get little screw-on diopters, which are a lot cheaper, or you can get a full matte box size of a diopter, like a big 114mm or 135mm. That way it can cover any lens you want to put it in front of. But the diopters really help with the accentuation of that kind of anamorphic look in the background because you're able to get such close focus. That squeeze really shows, and I really like the look with the diopters. Overall, these lenses are pretty cool for the price if you want that anamorphic look. It's not going to be quite as accentuated as a 2x squeeze, but also these lenses are kind of cool because they're more higher quality than a lot of other cheap anamorphics. Even just a lot of expensive anamorphics kind of look crappy wide open. It's harder to get a more pristine lens, which obviously a lot of us like to shoot on anamorphics because it doesn't look pristine. But with these, it's kind of like you're splitting the difference. It kind of seems like you're shooting on a semi-nice spherical lens, but you're kind of getting more of that anamorphic look. So the look of these, they're fairly sharp, wide open, and there's not a lot of chromatic aberration, and things aren't really falling apart in the background. They're pretty nice lenses in that way. So if that's something that you want, if you kind of want the in-between, these are definitely something to consider. All right, so that's all I have for this video, but before we go, I do want to talk about this video's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to present your work online. Like, if you get some cool lenses, you want to show off the work that you film with that, and your website is a place where you want to do that, and Squarespace makes it easy to build one of those. You can start with one of their pre-existing templates to get going, or you can build an entire website from scratch. Either way, I just love how easy it is to customize your website and really kind of define your look online and show off the work how you want to. And with all the built-in functionality, you'll have no problems doing that. They've even added this new kind of drag and drop snap grid system so you can move things around more fluidly on the page and put anything where you want to put it. So if you're anything like me and you just show off your work online, you can just do that with Squarespace. Click the link in the description to get 10% off, and I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. All right, so that's all I have for this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. That goes a long way. And as always, until next time, guys, I'm Sakurai. See ya.